Okay, my background, I was a primary school teacher. I worked in curriculum development. I know Dennis from having worked at O10 in resource development. Was the original designer of Murder Under the Microscope, a program that looks at ecology. And did my doctorate in designing and developing communities of practice for learning, in professional learning, in education. And somewhere along that line I picked up games and games for learning. And the interesting thing is that gamification has become a marriage of those two sets of things. So I'm a research fellow with the Centre for Games and Learning in Games for Impact in Arizona State University, and manage my own company doing consulting in gamification. So interestingly, I'm most interested in implementation of gamification that leads to stronger community building and therefore better learning environments, whether that's K-12 or higher education, academic learning. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here today. One of the things I would like to say, and we discussed this over morning tea, do I find a lot of skepticism in the academic arena around gamification. And yes, I do, and I think a lot of it is very justified. So sigh with relief if you're a little skeptical about what gamification is going to bring to learning, because there is a lot of rubbish out there. There's a lot of people have jumped on a sexy bandwagon, let's gamify everything, and it's actually not to benefit the students. It doesn't benefit learning, it doesn't benefit the institution to produce something that hasn't been deeply thought about. So taking your time and thinking about where this is going to fit in your goals is really important. And so I'm not going to try and sell you a crock here. I'm really interested in the deep aspects of learning. One of the things I prefer, even though I've used it in the presentation title, is not to use the word gamification, because it itself carries a lot of baggage. A lot of people use gamification techniques to convince you to do something you didn't want to do, and there's a lot of mistrust around that. So some of the preferred terms in the game development arena are game-inspired or game-infused, and those are much gentler terms to say we're not trying to build a game, we don't want to turn all of learning into a game, but we are going to draw on some of what we know games benefit, how games benefit learning, how they afford quality learning experiences. So that's a little bit of the background and why the title, Reimagine, Don't Rebrand. So if you're thinking you're just going to slap a gamified coating onto learning experiences, then that's probably the worst reason to go and do it. You'll hear in the game arena a lot of comments about chocolate-coated broccoli, which is just coating something that unpleasurable to most people. I love chocolate and I love broccoli, so I'm not sure I wouldn't like that. But, Phaedra Boinders from IBM, who's been doing a lot of research in gamification, calls gamification the must-have frosting that everybody seems to want to put on their learning experiences now. And I join you in the skepticism about that. So I'm going to concentrate today on badges as part of a game mechanic that could be valuable to higher education. And I'm going to show you three stories. So I have to say there isn't a wealth of research out there on this area because this is all new. It's not a mature body of knowledge. Everyone is pretty much on the edge of learning how to do this. Some people are a little further ahead than others. So I'm going to show you three cases that are really very interesting, where they took the chance to go deep and reimagine and reshape, rethink, reframe the experiences that were on offer to students. And they used badges to do that. Oh, sorry, I'm not in. So if you're thinking, let's gamify for the sake of gamifying, it's the wrong reason. So the DML Badges project, which was Hashtag and the MacArthur Foundation, took 30 projects that were starting into adding badges into their game accreditation, into their accreditation, recognition projects. And they vary, they're not all educational projects. But these are three things that emerged out of that you should be having conversations about at this stage. So what sort of claims will your badges make about the earners? So when you see a badge, what claim is that going to make about what the learner's done? And what evidence will your badges contain to support those claims? So digital badges are only as good as the metadata that sits behind them. So what data will come with that badge to make it valuable? What assumptions about learning will frame your consideration and implementation of badges? And this is where the reimagine comes in, because if you're going to look at applying a badge system, and those who disparage the concept of badge systems call them badgification, and that's something you want to avoid as well. But if you are going to look at that, you have to look at whether there's an opportunity here to change the pedagogy, to rethink the learning experience. So what is it going to open up for you to throw away all the old assumptions and start afresh? And how will this apply? And how will your badges program be introduced? Are you going to look at a centralised effort that runs across all of your courses? Or are you going to look at something that is a niche and smaller area to start with, and somewhere that maybe jumps out as a need? And I'm a big fan of looking for a need. So the three examples I'm going to show you relate to a need. Sorry, it's not to roll. Okay, so the first one is Plain, which I was the designer on, which is a professional community for teachers across Australia. It was a DIY-funded project, part of the digital education revolution, and was to build a space, a community for teachers to engage in professional learning about using information and communication technology in their teaching. It's K-12, including pre-service education, and has a gamified program within it. So the teachers enter into a gamification as soon as they join the program. Originally, most of the gamification was what we call onboarding. So that's getting teachers to experience what the community has to offer. And within the Plain experience, there were games, there were traditional courses, there were non-traditional small bite-sized course materials, there were community spaces, there was a repository that they contributed to and curated, and a number of other, a wealth of other objects. And this content was accredited with the New South Wales Institute for Teaching. So there's a lot balanced there between the fun of the game element and the seriousness of recognition and accreditation. So that gives you an idea of what the interface looked like. Before I came onto the design team, a decision had been made to go with Badgeville, which is a software as a service gamification program. But that's less important than what we were trying to do with the levels of the gamification. And I do show you a leaderboard there, but the whole aspect of leaderboards is very tricky and one that you need to think very carefully about. The reason that for that bottom top thought leader badge, what we tried to do was make sure that we had badges that were centrally earned through activity in the community, but also badges that were gifted by other members of the community in recognition of your support of them as a learner, or mentoring, or a leader. And so that's a really interesting space that isn't being occupied by a lot of programs in terms of how can we get people to offer and design badges, make this whole badge design issue more participatory than all designed from the centre, recognised from the centre. So we married the idea of a game-inspired design with accreditation. And so there were 8 levels in the program, and they were tied to the levels of graduate teacher or professional competence and professional accomplishment and professional leadership. And so the activities at those levels were matched the elements of those standards. And probably that's about all I want to say about that, except that like level 5 was the area we thought most teachers would aim to be, and we made that ninja, because who wouldn't want to be a ninja teacher? And up until that point, most of it was their own learning that they were focusing in on. But beyond that, to meet with professional accomplishment and professional leadership, they were moving into mentoring and leading, designing activities in the program, and indeed designing the badges for the further levels ahead. So that's plain. Unfortunately, in a very big political limbo, and we'll say less said about that, the better. But any of you who've worked for department or DEWA know that you can be a rooster today and a feather duster tomorrow. Okay, Just Press Play is a really exciting opportunity taken up. Now this program isn't academic, but it's in an academic institution. And it's in the, as you can see, Rochester Institute School of Interactive Games and Media. And strange thing is you'll find a lot of the current research being done in badges is in schools where people will already have their head possibly around games and gamification. But this is a really sweet program because, as it's been found in a lot of research in the United States and here, the attrition rate of first-year students at university is very high and is in many ways related to how connected they are. How connected they are to the institution, how connected they feel to each other, how connected they feel to the subjects that they're engaged in. So building a community is vitally important. So Just Press Play is designed to, what they did was looked at the habits of highly effective students and then took those and made them activities in a game-inspired system. And so there are lots of fun things, but there are also lots of things that make the difference for a student really thriving. So things like visiting your lecturer during their consultation hours is one of the things you can earn an award for. So getting students to break that barrier of not going to see your lecturer, not going to see your teacher or your tutor, because you may be too timid to do that, you may feel it shows some sort of weakness to go and visit. So making that a fun element has been really very valuable. And I won't go into all the kinds of activities they have, but it's refreshingly fun. And they're about to give this away. So if anyone were interested in picking up this infrastructure and then putting your own activities within it, you can do that very shortly. What they did in the first year, they had RFID tags, which became very complicated. This is run, by the way, for 3 years. In the second and third years, they've given each student a QR code, and the lecturers and academic staff and professional staff all have a QR reader on their phones, and when the students make a claim to have completed an activity, those people then scan their QR code and their accomplishment is added to the system. So that's turned out to be a very simple and nice way to go about this. Some of the other things they get students to do is form a recreation of a famous painting and add that to the system. So get other students together and pose to make a recreation of a famous artwork or a piece in time in history. Now that sounds like a lot of fun, but it also has a much deeper meaning. It's getting students to associate with each other in a fun way, making sure that no student is isolated in the first year cohort. And this is a program that runs across the whole 4 years of this degree. So they looked at the Bartle's player types and dropped killer because they figured that probably wasn't a really good type to encourage in the academic context. So they do create, learn, socialise, explore. And students are trying to balance their earnings in each of those quadrants. And they do fun things like flash mobs and other events that bring all the students together in some sort of cohort. There's a Find Your Teacher in the Wild, which is going and saying hello to your teacher if you run into them in town. It's not stalking, so it's not stalking your lecturers, but just being brave enough to say hello to your lecturer if you see them outside of the school. And they have an interesting point in that they made one where you have a photograph taken with the dean in his office. And I think it may have even been in academic dress. And it's interesting that the dean has lamented days when nobody came to visit and is starting to dress a little bit smarter because he's going to appear in a lot of photos. So there's a lot of fun happening there around making the context of learning human and making sure that students feel part of that human connection. So it's not part of the academic context. And there you can see what their mantra has been: add a game layer to the daily life of students. But there is one academic thing they did. They had a subject exam where, a first year exam, where the highest rating from the students was 85% of students passed. And they wanted to see if they could push that higher. So last year they threw out a challenge to say, if we can get this higher than 90%, everyone will win this special award. And that's not just first years, but the second years and so on. And a group of the senior students who were now second year, end of second year, came to the lecturer and said, we want to run mentoring classes for the students to get this happening. And she was quite taken aback because they just threw that in to see what would happen. And all of a sudden you're seeing students start to take responsibility for each other's learning. And that's really golden. And interestingly enough, after they had run that, they came back to her and said, okay, we want this on the calendar, we want to do it again next year. It was really valuable. We felt we really got to take on board more of the information ourselves, and we loved doing it. And there's no causality. They did actually get to 90% in that last year's class, but they're not claiming causality. The exciting thing is that the students were stepping up to take responsibility for each other's learning. And that's classic. Okay, that's just press play. Now, in a more formal context, the Masters in Educational Design and Technology at Concordia University in Wisconsin is about to start. I think that they actually opened the subject last month. Yes, September. And so this is brand new. And nothing here has a long history. Plain is 3 or 4 years old. Just Press Play is 3 years old. And this is brand new. But it's been a year in the making. And they had a master's degree that they were going to take wholly online. And they needed to reshape it, rework it to be online. So what a golden opportunity to start thinking about, let's throw out all our assumptions and see what we can do to make this really work. Because we know online learning isn't as easy as everyone thinks. So, and Bernard Bull has a really great blog, etail.org, if you want to go and read really beautiful work there. Highly academic and well researched. So what they did was unbundle all the competencies in that traditional program. So tore it apart and made it competency-based. So I think there's some 50 competency-based activities that you can do. And they broke them down and equalised them so that there'd be 3-unit credits in each of them. So it was, let's take everything away and rethink from the bottom what this could be. And you see some of those there in part of that master's. But then you think about how you can rebundle what you've torn apart. And this is really beautiful because they're not only running the masters here, and you can have the masters in educational design and technology or the masters in teaching and learning by rebundling that set in different ways, but you can also offer the graduate certificate in assessment by bundling up the assessment modules. And for learners, they're choosing which. They only have to do, I think, 40 and there's 50 on offer, and maybe perhaps more. I'm not absolutely sure of the numbers. But students are making their own customised degree by the choices they make. Now, some of them have ties, so you have to have done certain subjects in coordination with others. But for the most part, students are able to take what really is of value to them and make their degree out of that. So that's a really interesting concept, and it allows them to offer that one online course in many different ways. And I apologise for the poor quality of this slide, but I took it from a presentation online when Bernard Bull was presenting about this subject. And this is the next fantastic opportunity when you've unbundled things that you can now give opportunity to learning that's taken place outside your formal course. And we know TAFE, I know from our history, Dennis, and my history in TAFE, in O10, that TAFE, I think, gets it much better than the university sector in terms of recognition of prior learning or recognition of learning on the job. And when you've unbundled things like this, it's not a huge effort to take one of those competency awards and recognise it from another organisation, from prior learning, or from another university. I mean, I studied at 3 universities, and having to do or audit certain things as you move from one university to the next is very tiresome. So if you can get recognition for what you've done at a more granular level than the certificate or the testimonial, this is a much better way to go. Or from a MOOC. And that's the place a lot of universities are looking to start their badge experience, is by building a MOOC and then offering competency-based badges throughout that, which then may articulate to academic courses within the program. So MOOCs seem to be a really good place to start exploring what that badges might mean for academic learning. And that's me. I couldn't resist because I got to sit in the iron throne, so you get to see it as well. So, you know, that's basically all I wanted to say, is it's really important to think about an opportunity that may come up, a need. Something may signal an opportunity to throw away some assumptions and look at a truly well-structured, gamified badge system. But don't go into this because it's the sexiest, latest, newest thing to do. Because, you know, Gartner says 80% of all gamified projects will fail. And that's because they haven't thought deeply enough about it. And you're the people who do that thinking in academic context as learning designers. But this demonstrates there are really great cases out there of people who are looking for the best in learning for their students. So that.